I will present the results of a comparative study in which we investigated the sensitivity to referential pacts in children with autism spectrum disorder. So, very brief overview of what is autism spectrum disorder. It's a neurodevelopmental disorder that is characterized by social deficits and difficulties with communication. This social dysfunction always occurs with some repetitive behaviors, and children with and individuals with autism often have restricted interest. As you may notice from this definition, language is not considered as a primary symptom of autism. However, there is a huge heterogeneity in language skills across the spectrum, whereas some individuals with autism have intact structural language skills. Around 20% of children with autism never acquire functional language. However, it's widely acknowledged that the most consistently impaired language domain in autism is pragmatics. So children with autism struggle with switch in register, with negotiation of tone taking, with they have difficulties with understanding irony, or they sometimes they use idiosyncratic vocabulary so that the conversation doesn't go smoothly, and they fail to efficiently process social context. As I already said, it's a secondary, generally people believe that it's a secondary manifestation in autism because all those difficulties can be explained by impaired theory of mind. As you may know, very often children with autism have very poor performance in false belief tasks, and so it may be explained by their difficulty to actually spontaneously track and follow perspective of the people with whom they interact. And so they cannot actually tailor their utterances to informational needs of their conversational partners. However, there is another alternative explanation to this deficit, and it would be the difficulty with executive functioning. The fact that while you process the speech by others, you need to successfully inhibit your own perspective, and in the same time track perspective of others, make it harder for children with autism to be efficiently involved in those kind of exchange, because they have serious, in some studies it has been found that they have difficulties with cognitive flexibilities and inhibitory control. So it would be an alternative explanation to these difficulties in communication. So referential pacts, very rapidly, just an example. For example, you bought a piece of furniture from IKEA, so you will try to assemble this furniture, and you have many weird like abstract figures. And if you, for example, use a particular description to refer to one item, like shiny cylinder or something, it's very, very common that your partner and you will maintain this description throughout the whole exchange. However, if somebody else enters the room, somebody who was not there while you established this referential pact, and it may be expected from this person to use another description, such as metallic tube or something, for this exactly the same item. So here is just the representation of how it may be simplified. So referential pact, it's the fact that we expect the same partner to maintain the same description throughout the dialogue, and that we also expect that the new partner, somebody who was not there, who's not aware of your common ground with another person, will probably introduce another alternative label. And what is highly improbable is that the same partner, the one with whom you established the pact, will switch to another description. In general, it means that probably this person tried to communicate, tried to highlight the difference in so something new that he wants to communicate by this modification. So the experimental task that we used in this study was a simplified version of the task that was previously adapted with adults and with typical developing children. So it was some sort of a cooperative game in which children had to move objects following the instruction of the experimenter. So the goal of the game for kids was to make photos of pairs of objects presented on the screen. So some of these items had two possible frequent labels known to children. For example, it was in French, so probably it will sound... so it was médecin docteur in French. In English it makes physician, doctor probably. So we actually selected those items by studying the database of words that are frequently directed at children of like rather young age. So what happened? The experimenter played this game with the child and systematically several times used one particular description, such as physician, for example. Then either this experimenter was replaced by another person, or the same experimenter continued to play the game till the end. And during this second phase of the game, experimenter would use an alternative label for some of the items. So instead of saying physician, he would say doctor. And it was counterbalanced, so another half of children started with doctor and then they switched to physician. It was a within subject design, so each child played with two different sets of words in both conditions. So how can we interpret the measures that we get in this type of tasks? So again, it was Laura has already introduced this discussion on the partner-specific account of referential precedents and egocentric account. So the idea is, and it was partly what she has discovered in her studies, is that there is some sort of facilitation in using the same descriptions. And it can be attributed to both accounts. I mean, it can be explained by low-level memory priming, or it can be explained by the fact that you make an assumptions about partner's perspective, and so you expect the same partner to maintain descriptions through the exchange. But if there is also a way to differentiate between this account because the advantage in processing broken precedent with a new partner can't be explained within egocentric account, because like to actually do it faster with a new partner, you need to do some sort of expectation about this partner. And here it was the question previously about perspective, because it's true that it's kind of confusing. There are two different perspectives here in these tasks. There is first this conceptual perspective, just the idea that any referent can be introduced by unlimited number of descriptions, and there is different conceptual perspective on the same object. So it's just conceptual perspective. But then there is also the perspective of your conversational partner, and so that you may make expectation about your partner's perspective or not. So as I said previously, in autism, it may be hypothesized that both of these things can go wrong. I mean, we know that they probably have deficits in cognitive flexibility or with inhibitory control, so probably they may have difficulties just in confronting multiple conceptual perspective, but also another problem is that they can also fail to efficiently process a consensual partner's perspective. So we had two hypotheses. And there were three groups of children tested because children in our group, in the ASD group, scored below their chronological age on the mental, on the nonverbal IQ test, and on their receptive vocabulary. So we matched them to two different groups of typical developing children on their mental age, on their verbal age. And here are our results. So first of all, how did children deal with the fact that a new description was introduced by either new or the same partner? What we have found that surprisingly, despite the fact that they were older than children in both typical developing groups, they made a lot, kind of like 20% of the trials with broken precedent, they failed. So they touched something else on the screen instead of selecting the items. And it was, as I said, both descriptions, they knew both words, because half of the trials started with one alternative name and another half of the trial started with the second alternative. So we actually found that they have difficulty in just confronting conceptual perspective in general. And here we can only speculate that probably it's a result of the difficulties with cognitive flexibility. And the second part, we studied the reaction time. So as you remember, we wanted to compare if there is the advantage in processing broken precedent with a new partner, because you make expectation that the new partner is more likely to introduce new descriptions. And we found no effect of condition in any group of children. So there was no partner effect. I mean, they were delayed. Children in the verbal age match group and in the ASD group were delayed by the introduction of new labels, but it doesn't depend on the partner condition. So we also haven't discovered any even precedent effect in the mental age group, mental age match group. So the children in this group were very efficient in switching away from entrained description to another one. And here is what we can conclude. So first of all, we found no evidence of partner-specific processing, as I said, and actually we replicated exactly the same design was used in a study with only typical developing children in a larger sample, where we recruited 65 children of preschool age, and we also found no sensitivity to referential pacts, so that there was no effect on broken precedent. However, we did detected a small partner effect, but there was no interaction. And so the idea of this partner effect was that they were a little bit faster, like 5% faster, when they interacted with the same partner, no matter was it for the broken precedent or for the maintained precedent. They were just somehow feeling better and understanding better a partner with whom they previously interacted for a while. So we think that it reveals the same low-level priming effect. So at some point, children start to understand and process the speech a little bit more efficient if they continue to work with it, to interact with the same person. However, and I think it's a huge critics to all the studies that we present here today, we used labels, like we used lexicalized descriptions. And as you also saw, all the typical developing children, even sometimes they it seems that they haven't noticed that there was a modification of the label, because it's just very common names that they know, and we selected those words to be known by children. However, the strong effects of referential, like of the sensitivity to referential pact in typical developing adults was found when there was the descriptions that were used were more partner specific. So it was abstract figures, or like my example with IK, it was something that actually could be traced easier to the person who evoked this definition, this description. And another discovery that, probably some of the difficulties that individuals with ASD can exhibit in communication are not only related to their difficulties with theory of mind and social understanding. It's also possible that their the executive dysfunction, such as this cognitive flexibility, may influence on how they interact in social context, because, as I already said, those new descriptions are typically brought by different partners. So they may have these difficulties to switch away from more salient description that was just entrained to a new one. And that may cause troubles for them during interaction. That's it.
Thank you. So time for questions.
Hello. Thank you for a great talk. So I had a question, and this question actually sort of applies to the previous talk as well. So I see why I see the idea behind the manipulation where you switch experimenters. But if I was a kid and I've been brought into a lab and I'm talking to these, experimenter people who are kind of a strange class of people for me to begin with, and then I learned that one of them has certain preferences for how they describe things, it would seem pretty natural for me to then carry over, okay, I assume all these people are going to have the same kinds of preferences because they're all this group of experimenters. So I guess my question is, can you comment on, or would you think it's worth worrying about the fact that the kids may not assume that there's a difference in what the preferences are between people, even though they're different people? It seems like a reasonable inference to assume that all the people that you're going to be interacting with in this context will have similar preferences. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but the thing is that it was a within subject design, so there was two set of games for each child. So one, they played from the beginning until the end with the same experimenter, who suddenly at some point would switch to new descriptions. And there was another condition when we played some sort of, I received an important phone call, so I can't go on and play with you, and then so the experiment was replaced. Or in the second condition, the experimenter would say, it's not an important phone call, I can continue and play the game with you. So, I mean, yeah, of course, it's not a completely normal, ordinary interaction for kids. And also we wanted to make sure that they feel okay of playing with us, so they met us before, because we had to do all the evaluation of their verbal IQ, non-verbal IQ. So they met both person who worked as two experimenters before, and they already were familiar with both of them. And we made this replacement very salient. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Hey, I have a general question over here. So, here. So, I have one general question and one specific question. The general question, maybe it's also relevant to the previous talk. So why lexical items are used to as the anchor or leverage for to examine perspective taking? Because the concern is that whether it's really social, because that's it's just a word. It's just a term that we need to use. And in terms of mimicking, I think the autisms are pretty good at mimicking sometimes. And as we know, a significant proportion of them are much better musicians than we are. They can like mimic like the low level sounds and the units. And I wonder whether this is a very sensible way of testing perspective taking. So that's one question. The second thing is regarding, is related to your data. So can you switch back to the several, maybe we can do that resource. Yeah, yes, this one. So why, I wonder like there's probably like ad hoc finding about the verbal matching and the mental age matching, like why there are some differences between these two groups? Are the verbal matching groups?
Yeah, because they were of significantly different chronological age. I mean, the
Yeah, how
verbal
old are
age
they?
were around 3, and mental age were around 6. So it's a huge difference.
Oh, okay, that still shows. And also, yeah, in the next slide, then so is it because like, but so for the verbal matching group, you can see
Were much younger.
much younger. So, but for the older, typical developing kids, they don't show difference
Yeah.
between maintained and broken. That suggests like a developmental change. So
Yeah,
that,
so
okay.
like for them, both names are so familiar, so they
Uh-huh.
even probably haven't noticed the switch. I mean, they were very fast in, or even if they noticed it, their motor reaction were not affected. So
Or lexical competition is not that cognitively not
Yeah.
that demanding anymore.
there is
and
no
the-
costs for the
there's-
switch.
Yeah, ceiling effect. So yeah, then my first question about why lexical.
Yeah. No, I completely agree that it's a relevant point that there is a problem with those stimuli that we used. And actually in adult literature, it was more like the real description, elaborated descriptions rather than common names, common words. But the reason for this is because we tried to replicate another study that was conducted with children that did found the sensitivity to referential pact. And they used normal common words. And
Typical developing children.
Yeah.
Yes.
yeah, but there was another problem with their probably like design and analytical methods that could explain why they found the effect, and all of us actually failed to find the effect.
Or it's just like a different, it just tapped onto a different level of representation rather than the social or communicative perspective that you wanted to find out for autism kids. Yeah. Do you
And
think that's the
also,
point? Yeah.
it seems that for children with autism, it may be easier to entrain, like to repeat just after others. But as I said, the fact that different people can bring different perspective, it can be problematic for them, because then they need to switch from one description to another one. And this can be, it looks like it's problematic for them. So they would probably prefer to interact with people with whom they share more common ground, who they know for a long time, so that this confusion is less, like they can deal with it. So like the entrainment can facilitate the communication, but if it's only entrainment, it can be a problem, because you still need to switch. In real life, we always switch depending on the partners. We adapt to them, so.
Hi, these are about as much comments as questions, pointers for other literatures to look at. I'm thinking about your reaction time effects here, and I suspect that most of the reason why you're not seeing a reaction time effect for the mental age match controls is that in adults you typically get the reaction time effect when what you're actually looking at is whether the item under its other label continues to be a lexical competitor. So what you'd really need to be doing is looking at, I guess if they were calling it rabbit and it could also be called bunny, whether bunny is competing with something like ball or something else, right? And if
You mean phonological competitor?
Yeah,
To
whether
have
it
another
continues to serve as a phonological competitor.
yeah.
That's where you see the effect in adults, and I have no doubt that you would continue to see it in the mental age match controls if you were to do it that way. The second thought I had is that it had never occurred to me, but there's another literature going under a completely different name, which seems to traffic in some of the same ideas, right? Which is the mutual exclusivity literature, where you do have a very interesting both connection between these lexical items and definite descriptions. So I'm thinking here of the Markman and Diesendruck study, right, where you find that people do expect that you will not use a different label to refer to the same object, and you won't use a different fact to refer to the same object. But there, in children in 3 or 4 years of age, right, you do get the sensitivity to who the speaker is, but only for the facts rather than the labels, the definite descriptions. And so it seems like that might be a promising way to look at it. In the case of autism there, we also know that autistic folks, at least older ones, right, also show mutual exclusivity for the labels and for the facts. So at this point, we don't know.
Mutual exclusivity normally function the same way.
Yeah, what we don't know, I don't think, to the best of my knowledge, is whether they show the same speaker-specific behaviors for the definite description. It seems like that might be a really interesting thing to pursue.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I think that we're done with the questions now. Thank you, Ekaterina.